Well, I remember when I was starting my freshman year in high school, I got to move up to the high school, and that was a unique and exciting experience. But there was one moment that was probably the most anxious moment of the beginning of my freshman year, and then experienced it again at the beginning of sophomore year and junior year, and maybe even a little bit at the start of senior year. And many of you have experienced this feeling before. Some of you guys have been going through this the last couple of weeks. It was when you got ready to go to lunch, and the question was, when you got into the cafeteria, where am I going to sit? I don't know how big your school was. I went to a pretty large high school, and there were cafeteria tables all over the place. And walking in was just this moment of a little bit of panic and anxiety. And it wasn't really so much a question of where am I going to sit? It's really a question of who am I going to sit with? Who's going to let me sit with them, especially at the start of high school when you've had your friend group change a little bit over the course of the summer, and maybe some of your friends were in a different lunch wave than you were, and maybe you spent the first couple of days, first couple of weeks not knowing where to sit. Maybe you even sat alone for a little while. It's one of those moments that just really brings some anxiety, because when you think about a school cafeteria, it's not necessarily a place you think about of always warm, loving feelings, right? It can sometimes be a place of division. You've got this group of kids that sits over here and they sit together because they all like the same things. And you got this group of kids that sit together because they all like the same things. Maybe they're all into sports or they're all into video games. You got this group of kids over here that sits together because they don't belong to anybody. And so they just kind of banded together. It's usually where I sat. And so you just look around and each table is almost a little world in and of itself. And what you might have noticed is that as you've gotten older, even as you've gotten out of high school, life hasn't really changed a whole lot, because sometimes you find yourselves hanging around the same people because they have the same interest or look the same or live the same. And you got your house with your nice privacy fence to keep everybody out. And we kind of still struggle with some of those exclusive circles. But not all tables are like cafeteria tables, because I remember my grandmother's house. Her table was not like a high school cafeteria table, because everybody was welcome at my grandmother's table. It didn't matter who I brought over, what friends I brought with me. When Haley and I first started dating, she was invited to the table. Even I had family members that were not living right. They were not doing the right things at all. They were still invited to the table. And even in their small little patio home, when we would all gather together and you wonder, how in the world are we all going to fit? Somehow, there was always plenty of chairs. When you called and said, hey, so-and-so is coming with me, no problem. We've got plenty of seats, because that table was completely different than the tables I had experienced in school, because it was just special. It was a table that everybody was invited to. And it was a table where everyone was welcomed, because that's the power behind the table. The table plays this transformative role in our life. And maybe you're like me, and you just kind of go through life and you don't necessarily pay attention to these things till it presents itself to you, or you just sort of you took it for granted for a long time, and you didn't realize that all those people that regularly gathered around your table, how important those times were. We're in one of those seasons of life. Some of you are going through it, or you've been through it, where when we gather together as a family around the table, it's a moment of celebration, because that meant our week has been slow enough that we can all pause at the same time and share a meal. And it's become even more important to me now, where just a few years ago I didn't really appreciate it as much, because we're able to do it so regularly and so often, because the table is a powerful place. It's a place where we can share our stories and share our lives, and what we don't realize is that our hearts are really brought together through the times we spend around the table. So all the way back in January, we have this theme that we've come back through a couple of times throughout the year called Devoted. If you picked up a copy of the bulletin, that's our theme. It's right on the front cover of our bulletin. Maybe you've got a t-shirt that's got Devoted on the back of it because you bought one at the beginning of the year. And we're looking at this church in Acts chapter 2, this first church that we read about, that Jesus established After his resurrection, when Peter stands on the day of Pentecost and preaches that powerful sermon, and over 3,000 people are baptized that day, and then it goes through this process of massive growth and multiplication. And in Acts chapter 2, as Weston read to us, it said they were devoted. And we've been throughout the year looking at the different things that they were devoted to. And over the next month, what we're going to spend some time focusing on is how they were devoted to the table. Now, it said that they were devoted to the breaking of bread. And then it said in verse 46 that every day they gathered around the table. And so the question that I've always had is, when it says they were devoted to the breaking of bread, is that talking about sharing a meal together, or is that talking about the Lord's Supper? My current understanding, I would just answer that question with yes. Yes, I believe he has both of those concepts in mind, maybe even those concepts linked together in some powerful way. But what he wants us to see is that the table was such a vital part of the life of the early church because it helped them to grow together. And because they were devoted to the table, it brought about their health as a church. And it brought them together when the world was trying to divide them and when Satan was trying to sow division among them. Yet they kept coming back to the table because it was at the table that they built those unbreakable bonds. It was at the table that people of all different experiences in life came together and became one. And I believe because of their devotion to the table, it's one of the reasons why they experienced so much growth. But it's not just because they gathered to eat. It's because of the intentionality about building relationships. It's because of how they viewed the table. They did not view the table like a high school cafeteria table. It was not a place of division. They viewed the table like my grandmother's table, where they said, how many extra chairs do we need? There's always room for more. In fact, the reason why I believe Luke mentions this idea as he writes the book of Acts, this history of the early church, is because he's continuing a theme that he's already laid down in his gospel. In the Gospel of Luke, he records for us at least 10 separate occasions where Jesus finds himself around the table. In fact, at some point in the future, we're going to do a Bible class series on the different table scenes in the Gospel of Luke, because each of them is unique and it's profound. This morning, I want to look at one of them in Luke chapter 14. Now, when you open up to Luke chapter 14, what you're going to find is Jesus is at the home of this Pharisee. And this Pharisee has invited Jesus over for dinner, not just Jesus, but other people as well. And you got to go back to ancient culture. A dinner was a really big deal. It was a grand occasion. Now, he's invited to the home of a Pharisee, somebody that by Luke 14, he's already starting to experience friction with. There's already some tension in that relationship because Jesus has pointed out on numerous occasions up until this point why he believes that the Pharisees have kind of missed what the kingdom of God is about. And so a little before this, Jesus is going to start teaching in parables. And a parable is just simply a story that Jesus is going to tell, but it's going to have a different meaning. It's not just going to have a moral ending, but it's going to be a story that's going to require you to meditate a little bit, and it's going to invite you in, and it's going to teach you something about the kingdom of God. This is what it looks like when God is reigning as king. It's not just a nice story with a happy ending. It's really a vision of what it looks like when God's will is done on earth as it is decreed in heaven. And so Jesus goes to this Pharisee's house, and it's the Sabbath day. Now, we don't necessarily have the love and appreciation for the Sabbath day like they did back then. The Sabbath day was something that God gave to his people, to the Israelites, and the Sabbath day was special and unique. And you got to understand and appreciate the challenge and the blessing of the Sabbath day. Just imagine one day a week that you're just going to stop from doing everything and you're going to rest. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, that sounds amazing. I'd love a Sabbath day in my own life. And let me just say, if you don't regularly appreciate and take a form of a Sabbath day in your life, life has a way of slowing you down when you refuse to. But I want you to think about stopping. I'm not talking about the day to catch up on all of the things you didn't get to do because work and other responsibilities limited you from doing that. I'm talking about a day that you're not going to really do anything but feast together and spend time together and rest. And it sounds awesome for some of you. For others of you, it sounds like a nightmare because you're one of those productive people. You're like me. To just make me sit still and not do anything. That's challenging. But that's what the gift that God gave them. It was a day designed to recenter your life, to healing all of the ways your heart has drifted and been pulled by the responsibilities of life. And just refocus your mind and your heart back onto the God who's blessed you so richly. That was the original idea. By the time of Jesus, what it had turned into was one of the hardest working days of all because of all the things you had to pay attention to just to make sure you weren't going to break the Sabbath. And they had some really crazy rules and laws that they added to God's word to make the Sabbath even more complicated. But then they had some things that were really, really weird. Like, for instance, you couldn't heal somebody on the Sabbath day because they thought that was work, yet you could pull your animal out of the ditch if it got stuck in a ditch because, well, why not? That's your animal. You didn't want to leave it in the ditch. And so on this occasion, Luke 14, Jesus is at this Pharisee's house, and there's this guy in front of him, and he's got this issue of swelling. One translation calls it dropsy. It's basically this buildup of fluid around the joints to where he's swollen, makes the skin really tight. It's some type of potential bacterial infection that they didn't just be able to prescribe antibiotics to deal with, and it was really debilitating. And this man is at the home, and maybe he was brought there to see what Jesus was going to do. And Jesus just looks at him, and then Jesus heals him. He heals him on the Sabbath, to which the Pharisees lose their minds. How can you heal somebody on the Sabbath? You know, a day for healing. But how can you heal somebody on the Sabbath? You're working. You're breaking God's law. And Jesus is like, you're missing the point. You'll rescue an animal, but not a human. He's getting at how they viewed people. Because what the Pharisees had done is they had developed this mindset that some people were more valuable than others. And as they walked through life, they viewed it like a high school cafeteria. Well, that group I don't have anything to do with because I don't like those people. Just kind of wrote them off. Those people I can't hang out with because they're just a little too different for me. I got to find my crowd, my people. And the Pharisees' people were people that were just like them, and nobody else was quite as good. And they had completely lost their value and appreciation for the outcasts and the marginalized. The very people Jesus said he came to heal and to seek and to save. So he told them a story, a parable. And he starts out about there's this certain man, and this man is going to represent God the Father. And he's going to prepare this great feast and invite many guests. Those of you that have had children that have gotten married, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This grand event. You sent out the invitation. You've paid thousands of dollars. You found the right attire for not only the bride, but everybody else that's involved. And you've prepared the food, or you've catered the food, and you've got the entertainment, and everything is ready. And you want everybody that's been invited to come and to enjoy. This is your celebration for your family. It's a grand occasion. And in ancient times, when Jesus told this story, it was an even bigger deal. If you received an invitation in the mail to a great feast, you didn't just look at your calendar and go, well, you know, we're kind of tied up that day already, or, you know, these other things to do. I don't think we're going to go. We just RSVP. If you didn't show up, it was considered a sign of disrespect because this was such a grand occasion. And so he sends out all the invites. And then he says at the time of the banquet, he sent out his servants to go tell everybody, hey, the banquet is ready. Come on, come join us for the party. But they all began to make excuses. Excuses, not reasons for not coming. These are excuses. You know the difference, right? An excuse is something somebody else gives you. A reason is something you give. Well, I've got all these reasons why, but no, they're just excuses. The first guy said, you know, I just bought a field. I got to go see it. Please excuse me. Another guy said, I just got 5 new yoke of oxen. I'm on my way to try them out. Got to put them to work. I'm sorry. Please excuse me. And the other guy said, hey, I just got married, so I can't come. And I think all of these excuses, which Jesus is telling this parable from the vantage of God in the kingdom, and this banquet represents our relationship and our invitation to join him in relationship, that these excuses are actually still relevant today. Because I think if we're honest with ourselves, we make these excuses all the time. We just don't call them excuses. We call them distractions. The first one is this distraction of material possession. The guy said, I just bought a new piece of property, and I got to go check it out. I got a new boat. There's only so many weekends to use it. You know, I just got this new toy. Bought some new land, and I got to go take care of it. And I only have time at the time that God wants me to be with him. The second one that he says is distracted by work and business. The guy said, hey, I just got 5 new yoke of oxen. Man, my business is expanding. We're growing. It's an exciting time. And it's just taking a little bit extra out of my time right now. It's not going to always be that way. I just got to do this for now. And eventually I'll be able to cut back and be able to hire more. And it's going to settle down in a little while. When's that going to be? I'm not sure. But it's just this season of growth right now. And if we're honest, some of us have been distracted by that. And then the third one is personal relationships and family obligations. This poor young man said, I just got married. He blamed it on his wife. You can tell he's a newlywed because he hasn't learned, don't do that. That's not a good idea. Don't blame your wife for why you can't show up. But it's not just that. You know, only day we have together, Sunday. Life's just really crazy right now. Or I've got this other family obligation. And if we're honest with ourselves, we feel the same tension because we're all finding ourselves in this battle over what's urgent and important versus what is significant and eternal. And we just struggle through it on a regular basis. And every one of these things, listen to me, every one of the things that Jesus mentions in this story is good. His work good? Yes. His family good? Yes. Our material possessions good? Yes. They're all incredible blessings from God. They're all gifts he's given to each of us to enjoy and to draw us deeper into relationship with him. The challenge is how we view them. It's how we're looking at life. And what Satan will do is he will take these good things and he will use them as distractions to pull our heart away from God. And we start making excuses. It's just for a little while. It's just for right now. It's just this season of life. And what we don't realize is that we're creating habits that is setting and changing the direction of our lives. It's going to lead us down a different path. And we're allowing what is urgent and important to steal our attention and to turn our eyes away off of what is truly significant and eternal, over what will have the greatest impact, not on our life here and now, but on the life that is to come when our life here and now ends, and we will live in the thereafter. And so Jesus is going to finish the story. The servant came back and reported to the master. The owner of the house became angry and ordered his servant to go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, blind, and the lame. Go get everybody that you see. Now, in the context of this parable, he's talking about the Jews. The Jews are the ones who initially rejected God's invitation for relationship. He's telling this story in the presence of the Pharisees, the very people God was inviting in. And what realizes they've rejected his invitation. But now the story comes down to us, into our context, and we are to apply it in our lives. And he said, you go get everybody. Go get all the people the world has written off. And the servant came back and said, there's still more room. Did you catch that? There's more room. He said, you go to the roads and the country lanes, you go further out and you compel them to come in so that my house will be full. And I tell you, and here's the warning, not one of those who are invited will get a taste of my banquet. He's talking about those that rejected the invitation, that later on want to try to come back when it's too late. The takeaway from this story, there are several, but one of them is that God's invitation is for everyone. This banquet is representative of this relationship he's inviting us into, where he's calling us, and I love the image of the table. So for the next 5 weeks, we're just going to talk about the power of the table and this invitation that God is giving to us to come to the table. And what I hope you'll see by the time we finish this series is this is not just a New Testament idea. This goes all the way back to the very beginning of the story of God inviting his people to join him at the table. And what a blessing it is every week to gather as a church family. And even though we don't have a physical table right here in front of us, we are gathering together around the table to partake of communion every week, to remember, to celebrate the fact that our Savior gave his life on the cross, but he didn't stay in the tomb. It's not a funeral service. It's not a memorial service. It's a celebration. It's a reminder that when we walk out of here united, and we walk out of here with the hope that even when we are placed in the grave, our story does not end there. It's a celebration of the future hope that one day we will gather around God's table. And so at the last Sunday of this month, we're going to spend our entire sermon talking about the Lord's Supper in an extended communion time together. And then in the first Sunday of October, for our first Sunday fellowship, in our message, we're going to talk about that future table that we're going to gather around in heaven that the Bible is very clear about. We're going to gather as family. All tribes, tongues, and nations. And what I believe is going to be the biggest table you've ever seen in your life. And we're going to feast and enjoy God's company. But don't miss this. His invitation is for everyone. His grace knows no boundaries. There's not a place you could have gone. There's not anything you could have done that God has withdrawn his invitation from you. He's inviting every one of us to come to the table, to lay our excuses and our distractions aside, to properly view them as God's good gifts to us, to draw us deeper into relationship with him, not to allow them to pull our hearts away from him. His invitation is for all. I believe he has you here today for a reason. Not just to hear this lesson, but to hear his heart calling out to you. It's time to come. But here's the second thing that we need to remember. It's that our mission as a church is to invite more people to the table. I know we come up with fancy terminology like evangelism, but this is the simplest idea. It's just to make more room and to say, come on to the table. We got plenty of chairs. And when our chairs start to get full, we'll add more chairs. Because we will never run out of room for people at God's table. Because God's table is open to all. And as you go through your life, as you go to work, as you spend time with your family, as you're living in your neighborhoods, and as you're interacting with people, this is your mission. Your mission is just to invite people to come to the table. It's to show them what it looks like to live in relationship with the God who's got room for everyone. It's for us to show as we come together from people with different backgrounds and experiences and different economic situations and different ethnicities to come together and to be family. And to say we are one, we share together at the table. But our table is not exclusive. Our table does not kick out anybody. Our table has plenty of room. This is where we must always challenge ourselves to make more room. And it sounds good in theory, and it sounds easy in theory, but we're humans. And what we are naturally drawn to is that high school cafeteria scene, That's where our hearts naturally go. And you know how I know that? Because I know it's true about me, and I know it's true about you. Because when you walk into a place you've never been before, you start looking for people you know. Do you not? Most of us, probably 90+% of us, walk into a room and look for someone we know because we want to be drawn to comfort. And we'll go to those people, even if we don't know them that well at all, but they're the only soul that we know. Now we feel comfortable, or at least less awkward. And that's where we are as humans. And if that's who we are as humans, then our challenge will always be when we gather as God's people that we don't just start to click together, but that our hearts are for everyone. And our hearts say, hey, I'm so glad you're here. Come join us at the table. Because there's no person God can't reach. There's no person too far from God that He's not calling back to Him. And as we live our lives, we're just handing out invitations to the banquet. God's inviting you to come. If you're here this morning and you've never given your life to Christ, I hope you understand God is inviting you to His table. It's not our table. It's His. And we're blessed to gather around it, to be a part of a loving church family. God's inviting you to join that. He's inviting you to surrender your life so that you can fully experience what a huge blessing it is to live in relationship with Him, to have everything in your life repurposed for His good and His glory. Every relationship, every responsibility, every blessing, every material possession, every dollar in your bank account, everything that you are and own to be repurposed for Him so that you can properly enjoy it the way that He created you to enjoy all of His blessings. This is what He's inviting you to. Oh, don't get me wrong, it's going to look very different from everything you've ever understood in life before. But you're going to unlock blessings you've never imagined. If you're here today, your table's gotten a little exclusive, or maybe you've been distracted and you've drifted away from God and your heart's not where it needs to be. And you recognize that you used to have a seat at the table, but life kind of pulled you away and you don't really know how it happened. You looked up one day and you weren't there anymore. Your seat's still there. Jesus is still saying, come. There's plenty of room. So this morning, if we can encourage you, if we can pray for you, if we can baptize you today, we'd love to do that. As God says, come to the table. If there's anything we can do, please let us know as together we stand and sing.